I have always believed that the family is sacred, paramount, and inviolable, that its interests should be above personal ambitions, above career aspirations, above any material possessions. At least, this is exactly the dogma my parents instilled in me with enviable tenacity throughout my childhood, instilling it in me with the same relentlessness with which the sculptor carves the shape out of stone, leaving no room for doubt. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. My name is Carlotta, I am 32 years old, and I live in Bari, where for the last 7 years I have been working in the marketing department of a large technology company that is growing so rapidly that it seems that the very speed of development has become its philosophy. 5 years ago, when I was still a modest specialist with limited means, I decided on the most adult, most independent act in my life. I bought an apartment, albeit small, even in need of renovation, but my own, the one that I could return to, knowing that you were at home here. Financial difficulties hit me as soon as I signed the mortgage agreement, and the monthly payments seemed monolithic, unyielding, like slabs falling on my shoulders. But I did it. I cut costs, gave up spontaneous pleasures, and worked part-time on weekends, and I did it. Everything changed last month when I was promoted. I became a senior marketing manager, a position I had been working towards for not a year or two, but a whole 5-year period full of work, delays, ideas that came to mind late at night, and countless presentations in front of indifferent customers. The salary increase turned out to be not symbolic, but quite tangible, almost 4% more than the previous salary, and when the HR director said the exact amount, at first I couldn't even believe my ears and, internally shuddering from a possible mistake, I carefully asked her again, hanging on every word with the alertness of a person who was promised a long-awaited salvation. My first thought, contrary to expectations, was not a vacation by the sea, new clothes, or fine restaurants. No, the first one was the mortgage. The idea that I would be able to pay off the rest of the debt a few years ahead of schedule seemed to me not just tempting, but almost narcotic. I saw myself as free, truly in control of my life, and this feeling, this anticipation of freedom, was almost physically palpable, like fresh air after a long imprisonment. I couldn't wait to tell my family about it. To my parents, who were always proud of me, or at least I believed in it. My younger sister Beatrice, who recently married Christian, a man from the world of finance, which I suspected was more his mask than his real profession, because his involvement in everything always left a trail of uncertainty. I helped them, of course I did. For the wedding last year, I contributed an amount that is not customary to talk about out loud, but which noticeably thinned my savings. In addition, every month I transferred $600 to my parents for utilities, medicines, and daily expenses. Dad had retired a long time ago, forced to leave his job because of back pain, and Mom's part-time job at the library brought more moral satisfaction than money. I've never complained. Family is needed to support each other, isn't it? That evening, I invited everyone to my parents' house. Mom, as always, set the table as if we were expected not for a family dinner, but for a special reception. Her famous roast, hot mashed potatoes, and grape pie, which she always made especially airy. Dad, pleased, opened a bottle of red wine, one of those that are saved in case. Beatrice and Christian appeared in clothes clearly designed for evenings in trendy restaurants, but I attributed it to the habit of looking impressive. When we sat down at the table, restraining my excitement, told about the promotion. Senior marketing manager, I said proudly. That's wonderful, dear. Mom smiled and put a huge portion of mashed potatoes on my plate, as if her approval was expressed through generosity. How much do they pay now? Dad asked, not hiding his interest. I named the amount, and their eyes widened involuntarily. Fantastic, he said, raising his glass. To Carlotta's success. We clinked glasses, and at that moment I really felt like I was standing on top of the world. I shared my plans. Almost all the additional funds will be used for the mortgage. If I persevere, in a year and a half I will be able to be completely debt-free. The silence that followed these words was strange, almost ominous. Mom and Dad exchanged glances, And in that silent gesture, in that lightning, fast but expressive eye contact, a whole story slipped through, not just doubt, but also a kind of unspoken expectation, as if they were waiting for a reaction from me that would fit into their ideas about family loyalty, about what the right thing should do. A daughter raised by them with love, but also with unshakable moral principles. Beatrice, who was sitting a little to the side, busily put down her fork. Her slender fingers trembled slightly, as if she couldn't wait to voice what might have been accumulating in her for a long time, and with a light, almost careless intonation said, "Is this really the best use of your money?" Mom, frowning, finally asked a question that hid more than simple bewilderment. "What do you mean, Carlotta?" I was confused, not expecting a trick, especially at a moment that I so longed to share with them, as my small but significant victory. Dad cleared his throat, clearly preparing to say something that, in his opinion, should have sounded like paternal prudence. "Well, darling, you're already paying your mortgage on time. Now that you feel a little better, you shouldn't rush these payments." "Yes," Beatrice said, twirling her wedding ring on her finger, looking both caring and slightly moody, as if she was trying to soften the impending confession. "Actually, Christian and I have been having problems with the rent lately. His commission structure has changed, and things are not going as smoothly as before. It would be very helpful if you could contribute a little bit every month." I stared at my sister, as if the words that came out of her mouth did not fit into the usual framework of family conversations. "Do you want me to help you pay the rent?" "Only temporarily," Christian interjected, his voice surprisingly calm, like a man for whom such requests had become the norm. "Until things get better." "And your father and I," Mom added, carefully, as if checking for a reaction, "are thinking of replacing the car. Repairs are getting more expensive, and it would be great if you could help a little." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mind, still reeling from the excitement of the promotion, was racing in search of logic. "Wait, let me understand. I just told you that I got a promotion, and your first thought is how can my money benefit you?" "Don't be selfish, Carlotta," Beatrice snapped, as if this accusation was supposed to put me in my place. "That's what kind of family, we help each other." "I'm already helping," my voice cracked, despite my efforts to remain calm. "I send my mom and dad $600 each month for communal services. I gave you $10,000 for your wedding last year. How can that be selfish?" I continued, feeling my inner tension escalate into something close to despair. "The wedding money was a gift, Beatrice. And the money for utilities is just basic support, yes, but it's also money. We are now talking about new needs, constant payments, rent, and a car. This is no longer just a gesture of goodwill, it is a way of life." I took a deep breath, trying to find the words so as not to sound harsh. "I understand that everyone has needs, really. But I also have goals. I dreamed of paying off my mortgage ahead of schedule, and now I have a chance. I want to use it, not because I don't like you, but because I need to take care of my financial security." "So your apartment is more important than your family?" Dad asked, and there was a note of bitter disappointment in his voice, which had been kind and gentle before. "That's not what I'm saying," I replied, feeling my cheeks burn. "I'm saying that if I focus on my future now, then in a year and a half I'll have more flexibility to help even more if needed." Mom sighed heavily, theatrically, as if her heart had been wounded by my selfishness. "I think now we know where we are." The rest of the dinner became a torment. Conversations became sparse, glances became long and full of hidden reproach, and the silence became ringing and dense, like the air before a thunderstorm. Even the roast, which I always considered my mom's culinary masterpiece, tasted like cardboard. As soon as the trip home began, I felt a heaviness building up in my chest, a mixture of guilt and resentment, doubt and disappointment. Was I really being selfish? Was I wrong to dream of freedom and independence before taking on the role of a family sponsor again? The inner voices argued with each other, but deep down I knew I had to stick to my plan. It's not just a dream. This is my future. 3 months have passed. The mortgage was melting away before my eyes, with each additional payment, I felt another weight being lifted from my shoulders. But the family. It was a completely different story. Parents' calls have become predictable in their structure. The water heater is malfunctioning, Dad needs new glasses, and it's difficult for Mom to get to the pharmacy. Beatrice began to write more often, almost regularly, describing one sudden financial problem after another. She was demoted, allegedly for violating deadlines, or perhaps she just couldn't cope. Their situation with Christian became precarious, and I continued to transfer money as usual. One part of me did it out of a sense of duty. The other is out of the vain hope that one day my generosity will be recognized. But it didn't happen. Gratitude became brief, almost routine. Requests are becoming more frequent and direct. It seemed that my help had become something taken for granted, not a gesture of love. One Tuesday evening, I received a text message from Beatrice. My birthday is on Saturday. Christian's mom. At 1800 hours. Bring a nice present. Address. I thought maybe this was a chance to get things right. At the same time, I'll get to know the rest of Christian's family, whom I saw only briefly at their wedding. His mother Sandra, according to Beatrice, was picky, which in her vocabulary meant judgmental and controlling. On Friday, I spent my lunch break looking for a gift, a designer bag that Beatrice had been eyeing for a long time. Almost $500. I hoped that this gesture would show that I don't hold a grudge. Saturday came. I drove up to a large colonial house in a prestigious area. Cars lined the street. The gathering was clearly not expected to be modest. Clutching the gift bag, I rang the doorbell. It was opened by a woman in her 60s, as strict as a gymnasium teacher. Her eyes searched me from top to bottom. You must be Carlotta, Beatrice's sister. Yes, it's me. It's good to see you again, Sandra. She nodded curtly and motioned me inside. The living room was filled with people, many of whom were strangers to me. I noticed my parents chatting with a couple. Beatrice, surrounded by her friends, was beaming. Christian was standing in the corner next to his father and sister. I had barely taken 3 steps into the room when Sandra's voice, loud and shrilly confident, rang out with such clarity that the conversations that were taking place in different corners of the spacious living room began to fade one by one, as if someone had lowered the conductor's hand, calling for attention. Stop, Carlotta, she said with a note of icy superiority. I wanted to ask you something. Why do you refuse to help your sister financially when you seem to have every opportunity to do so? Instantly, there was a tense silence in the room, and I felt my face heat up, not only from shame, but also from confusion and inner protest at the very tone with which it was said. I'm sorry, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, but I was really helping Beatrice. I didn't have time to finish, as Sandra took the floor again. Her voice echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls, as if with a cold echo. Beatrice tells me that you've received a big promotion, she continued with exaggerated awareness, but she and Christian are struggling to pay the rent. And you're not helping. It seems to me interesting. I looked at Beatrice, who suddenly pretended to have found something extremely fascinating on her phone screen, as if at that moment the messages had become more important than the sister standing at the center of the family drama. I'm really helping her, I repeated carefully. I've sent her money several times in recent months. Sandra just grinned, not trying to hide her contempt, her lips curled into a mocking half-smile. You could easily cover their entire rent if you wanted to, she said through her teeth. But you prefer to save money to pay off your apartment ahead of schedule. Very selfish behavior. These words, uttered with feigned equanimity, sounded like a slap in the face. I looked around. My parents were sitting with their eyes downcast, clearly choosing a position of evasive silence, in which there was more agreement than neutrality. Several of the guests were watching with interest, some whispering to each other, others clearly trying not to interfere, but their looks spoke for themselves. At that moment, I wanted to disappear, as if I had never been there. As if sensing my desire to leave, Beatrice suddenly appeared next to me, her fingers clutching my arm with the desperate tension that people have when they are in danger of losing control of a situation. "Please don't go," she whispered. "It will only make the situation worse. People will start asking questions." My parents hurried over to us, and my mother almost hissed, "Stay, Carlotta. Don't make a scene." And I stayed, swallowing my pain, my anger, my growing sense of betrayal, which grew inside with every passing moment, as if someone was squeezing my chest. The dinner that followed was torture. I sat in silence, watching blankly as Beatrice opened the presents, smiled in response to congratulations, and laughed as if nothing had happened. When it was my turn, I handed her the designer bag, the one she wanted so badly, forcing an unnatural smile. "Oh, how sweet," Sandra commented, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I know that you earn enough to buy something really special." Several of the guests seemed to nod in agreement. Even my parents exchanged glances and nodded. Their silent approval of these words pierced me like a knife, so quietly, so casually, but with such painful precision. "Not everyone understands the importance of helping the family," Beatrice remarked with forced drama, giving me a meaningful look full of condemnation, a reminder that, in their opinion, I was back on the other side of the barricades, the side where there is no place for sacrifice, where there is only self-interest. I sat stunned by their audacity, how they all, as if by unspoken agreement, turned me into a culprit, into an exile, into someone who allegedly betrayed them with her choice. I spent the rest of the evening buried in my plate, responding briefly and politely only when addressed. As soon as the opportunity arose, I quietly, without attracting attention, slipped to the exit and, without saying goodbye, left this strange house in which, despite all the family closeness, I felt like a stranger. On the way home, tears, angry, offended, tired, blurred my vision. The days passed, but no one called, no one wrote, no one apologized, as if that evening, with its public humiliation and cruel public relations, simply did not exist. But he existed, and I couldn't get him out of my head. The following Sunday brought an invitation from my parents to a regular family dinner. I almost refused, wanting to preserve the remnants of my dignity, but then I decided, no, this is a chance. A chance to finally say something that has been accumulating for a long time. Mom said Beatrice would be there too. I arrived and found them already at the table. Beatrice and Christian were sitting next to each other. Dad was butchering fried chicken with his usual meticulousness. Mom was fussing with dishes. The ordinariness of this scene was especially painful after everything that had happened. After awkward conversations about the weather and work, I couldn't hold back anymore. "I think we need to talk about what happened at Beatrice's birthday party," I said, putting down my fork, and the table froze. "What do you mean?" Beatrice raised her eyebrows, pretending not to remember anything. "I mean, the way Sandra publicly humiliated me. She accused me of not helping you financially. And none of you," my voice trembled a little, "none of you even tried to take my side." Beatrice gasped, and her face instantly turned red, not from shame, but from indignation, which flared up in a bright flash, like a spark in a dry forest, ready to turn into a fire. "Don't you dare insult my mother-in-law," her voice trembled, but not from tears, but from anger, carefully restrained in a public setting. "Sandra was just telling the truth. You're being selfish, Carlotta." Christian, who was standing next to me, who had maintained a silent presence until now, just nodded, adding in an icy tone that seemed to shatter my self-esteem into fragments, "My mother sees right through you. You only care about yourself and your stupid apartment." I turned to my parents, hoping, no, almost praying, for support, for some sign that they saw something wrong in this situation, that they, my closest people, would take my side. But instead of sympathy, I saw on their faces only embarrassment, some kind of painful desire to get away from the conflict, hide, pretend that they had not heard either the accusations or my words. "Well, darling," Mom began uncertainly, as if she was afraid of her own rightness, "lately you've really been more focused on your mortgage than on your family obligations." Dad finished for her without looking at me, as if saying it relieved their soul, but did not ease mine. I stared at them, at these people who raised me, fed me, treated me, taught me, hugged me, and who, as I naively believed, would always be my rear, my support, my first defenders. But at that moment, deafeningly clear and inevitable, I realized what I didn't want to admit. They saw me not so much as a daughter, but as a resource, a reliable source to turn to in difficult times, who had no right to get tired, argue, or refuse. Not a person worthy of respect and recognition, but a convenient support mechanism, always on, always available. I think I need a break. My voice was calm, too calm to be normal. I got up from the table. From all of you. The next few months were spent in a whirlwind of work, tasks, and plans that I set before myself as a shield, as the only opportunity to focus on something that could be controlled. I stuck to my mortgage repayment plan with the same tenacity that I used to try to keep my family afloat. With each additional payment, I felt like I was getting closer to liberation, not only from the financial burden, but also from the invisible but painful threads that pulled me back. The balance was decreasing, and soon I saw a light at the end of the tunnel. My relationship with my family remained cold, almost formal. I still sent my parents $600 a month, and occasionally, when Beatrice made an urgent request, I transferred small amounts to her not out of love, but rather out of habit, out of a sense of duty that I could not erase. Communication became brief, businesslike, devoid of the former warmth. No more Sunday dinners, no more calls from my mom telling me about the neighbors or pie recipes. Only numbers, requests, and translations. And so, on one of the unremarkable Tuesdays, in the morning stream of emails, among promotional newsletters and work tasks, I received the very notification letter that I had been working on all these years. Confirmation of mortgage payment. The last payment was successfully processed. I stared at the screen in disbelief, as if I couldn't allow myself to believe that this had happened. My apartment, every inch of it, every crack in the wall, every creak of the floorboards, is now completely mine. No more debt. Only freedom. I wanted to celebrate, and despite everything that had happened, my first thought was, what if I invited my family? Maybe it would become a new chapter, a symbol of reconciliation, the beginning of a new stage in which we could be closer, more honest, more respectful to each other. I've booked a table in a nice restaurant in the city center, a quiet, refined place, perfect for such an event. "Hi, Mom," I said when she picked up the phone. "I have good news. I want to celebrate them. I paid off the mortgage." There was a rare, almost forgotten joy in her voice. "Oh, that's great, honey." For the first time in a long time, I heard sincerity in her tone. "I'd like to invite you and Dad to dinner on Saturday. To the center, to the restaurant. Finally, let's note." "Of course I'll tell them," Mom replied after a short pause when I mentioned that I would like Beatrice and Christian to come too. Saturday has arrived. I arrived a little earlier, nervous but feeling pleasantly excited. The hostess led me to a large table in a cozy corner. I ordered a bottle of champagne and started waiting. The parents came first. They were dressed up, smiling a little uncertainly, but warmly. We exchanged hugs, a little stiff, but there was an attempt in them, and that's something. And so, the restaurant door opened again, and I froze. Beatrice and Christian were followed by a whole procession. Christian's parents were coming in, Sandra with a face full of importance and her husband Roberto, followed by a woman, clearly Christian's sister, with her husband and 3 children, noisy, restless, aged from 5 to 10. Beatrice, beaming, came up to the table. "I hope you don't mind additional guests. It's my family now, too. I thought they should be here." I sat in a daze, silently watching as Sister Christiana brought in the waiters to rearrange the tables, to provide a place for everyone. My family evening, my victory, my desire for peace and warmth, all in 1 minute turned into something alien and uncontrollable. Sandra nodded at me, but didn't even bother to greet me, as if this gesture, cold, arrogant, steeped in hidden reproach, was the only thing she felt it necessary to do in recognition of my presence. And then, without wasting a minute, Beatrice, beaming as if she had just won the crown at a family manipulation contest, loudly announced to the whole group, "Since Carlotta has paid off the mortgage, now she can afford to be more generous. So, friends, order whatever you want." And her words, picked up with enthusiasm, swept across the table like a command to start a feast. The children screamed as if on holiday, and enthusiastically began flipping through the menu, poking at the pages with dishes of truffles, seafood, and delicious premium steaks. I sat there, stunned not only by their audacity, but also by the frightening ease with which the whole scene was perceived by others as normal, as a matter of course. Even my parents, who, it would seem, could have shown common sense, studied the menu with interest, without meeting my eyes, as if agreeing with the unspoken rule: if Carlotta is now free from mortgage oppression, she must put her shoulder to the weight of other people's needs. Something inside me, which had been dormant for a long time, shifted, like a foundation tile that suddenly moved under the pressure of time and oblivion. Maybe it was because I noticed that Sandra, pretending to just look at the wine list, had actually already ordered a bottle of wine worth $120, for her side of the table, of course, without even bothering to coordinate it with anyone. Maybe it was the moment when Christiana, without hesitation, demanded the most expensive seafood dish on the menu, as if it were an ordinary Tuesday, and not someone's personal holiday. Or maybe altogether, all the months of accumulated irritation, feelings of being used and neglected, have reached a critical point. I excused myself, saying I needed to use the bathroom, and instead went to the waitress, pulling her aside. "I would like to change my order," I whispered, trying to speak calmly. "Please prepare separate invoices for each group. I will only pay for my dish and the table reservation. Let the rest pay for themselves." The waitress, slightly surprised, nodded and, having written down the details, left to fulfill my request with professional equanimity. When I returned to the table, everyone was still chatting, laughing, ordering snacks and drinks, not noticing either my absence or the fact that something important had already changed. I put on the mask of a smile and restrained again, allowing myself to be a part of the conversation only insofar as it required decency, while every toast seemed to be a carefully disguised jab at me. "To Carlotta," Christian's father said, raising his glass, "who can finally afford to stop being so frugal." Laughter. "And to my sister," Beatrice added, "who, I hope, will soon realize that the family deserves her generosity more than the bank." My parents, sitting next to me, laughed, nodding in agreement, as if these were harmless jokes, and not outright attempts to morally oblige me to pay for everyone. I looked at them, at my parents, at my sister, at someone else's, now supposedly family, and realized that I saw them in a completely different way. Not as loved ones, not as those for whom I lived and tried, but as people who easily adjust reality to their needs, without thinking about what it would be like to be someone who gives without receiving anything in return except demands. Dinner continued, dishes followed each other, children demanded new servings of soda, desserts appeared and disappeared, remaining half untouched. I was mentally calculating how fast the total bill was growing, making sure that it was approaching several thousand. And so, when the coffee was served, the moment of truth arrived. The waitress appeared with a neatly folded stack of receipts and began distributing them on the table. "There must be a mistake," my father said immediately, without looking at the check. "Everything should be on the same page. My daughter is treating us today." The waitress looked at me, raising her eyebrows questioningly. "Actually," I said in a flat voice, "I asked for separate bills. I only pay for myself and for the booking. Everyone else pays for their orders." The silence that followed was so complete and shocking that it seemed as if the air in the restaurant had become thicker. "This is outrageous." Sandra was the first to come to her senses. "You invited us to dinner." "Actually," I turned to her without changing my tone, "I invited my parents, Beatrice and Christian. Everyone else came on their own initiative. And if anything, it was Beatrice who suggested ordering the most expensive dishes. I'm not." But this bill is over $500 just for me and Roberto. Sandra muttered, flipping through the check with the look of a shocked queen. Christian's sister stared in panic at her bill, which included the orders of all 3 children, who had been demanding everything all evening. "It's not fair," Beatrice screamed. "You know we're having financial difficulties. And you ordered a steak for $75 and 2 cocktails for $18, I pointed out calmly. I took out my credit card and handed it to the waiter along with the individual receipt. "Everything's ready," I said, and at that moment I felt something inside finally straighten out. "Carlotta, you can't do this," Mom hissed, leaning toward me, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Actually, I can, and I said evenly, calmly, but with that icy clarity in my voice that required no repetition and left no room for objections. I got up from my chair, as if throwing off the shackles of expectations into which they were trying to drive me, and, turning to the waiter, loudly, so that no one would have any illusions, I said, "Please make sure that all the guests pay for their orders. No account should remain open. No one leaves until they pay." With these words, I left the restaurant, leaving behind a wave of angry protests, confused explanations, and desperate cries of please, as if from those who suddenly realized that the holiday was ending and they would have to really pay. My phone started vibrating even before I got to the car, throbbing in my pocket like a living thing demanding attention. I didn't answer. I wasn't going to let myself be dragged back into this cycle of guilt and manipulation. When I got home, I turned off my phone and for the first time in a long time I fell asleep deeply, calmly, without nightmares, without worries, without mentally scrolling hurtful phrases in my head. I slept like a person freed from years of oppression, and woke up the next morning with a lightness in my body that I probably hadn't felt since I signed the mortgage agreement. When I finally decided to turn on my phone, I was met with an avalanche, dozens of missed calls, messages full of reproaches, demands, tantrums. They all boiled down to one thing: come back and pay the bill, you've embarrassed us, you owe it. The total amount, as I understood from the confused messages, was close to $3,000. The knocking on the door started around noon. Through the peephole, I saw my parents and Beatrice standing in the hallway, frowning, angry, and their faces distorted with indignation. For a moment, I wanted to pretend that I was not at home, as if I did not hear their persistent blows, did not see the shadows of their figures behind the glass. But I knew I couldn't avoid this conversation. I took a deep breath and opened the door. They didn't wait for an invitation, but silently squeezed inside, as if this apartment was still part of their territories that didn't rightfully belong to me. Their faces were flushed with anger. "How could you?" Beatrice broke off first, her voice trembling, but not from pain, from rage. "Do you even realize how humiliating that was?" $3,000, Carlotta, my father interjected, pointing at me like a prosecutor in court. "That's what you got us into yesterday. We had to put it on a credit card. We'll be paying interest on this amount for months," Mom added with a tragic expression on her face, as if it were a life disaster. I crossed my arms over my chest and leaned against the wall, holding back my outburst. And who is to blame for the fact that I invited 4 people, but 11 came? I asked. Who decided that it was okay to come with the whole family and order the most expensive dishes, as if it were a banquet at the state expense? "This is my family," Beatrice shouted. "Christian's parents wanted to celebrate with you." "No, they wanted a free lunch," I replied calmly. "So have you all this time. It's not fair." My father protested, but I raised an eyebrow, and he fell silent. "Mom, Dad, when was the last time you called me just to ask how I was doing? Not about bills, not about needs, not with another request, just to find out how I am." I let those words hang in the air. It's always been about money. Always. It all came down to what I could give you. "The family should help," Mom insisted, trying to preserve the remnants of the morality she used to rely on. "It's funny because, in my opinion, I'm the only one who helps." I went to the table, took out a neatly folded folder, opened it. You know, I kept records. Over the past year, I've given you over $10,000, not counting the monthly utility bills. And you, Beatrice, I glanced at my sister, almost 15,000, including your wedding fee. It's never been enough, has it? They were silent, looking at me with expressions that were a mixture of shame and reproach, but not remorse. I'm paying for your utilities, and you want a new car. I'm helping with the wedding, and you expect me to pay the rent. I invite you to celebrate my achievement, and you come with an army and have a feast. You're overturning everything. Beatrice was crying. We are fighting. Christian's job is unstable, and my salary has been cut. And you're sitting in a paid apartment. The apartment I worked hard for. I interrupted her. No one gave it to me. I saved every dollar, made every payment, gave up vacations, pleasure, and help. And all this time, I've been helping you anyway. And now you want more. You have to reimburse us for dinner. And to apologize, especially to Sandra and Roberto, the father said, as if passing sentence. I couldn't help but laugh. Apologize? In front of a woman who insulted me in public? In front of the family who ruined my evening, ordering truffles, wine, and seafood at my expense? I shook my head. No. That's not going to happen. So you're just going to leave us drowning in debt? Beatrice's voice turned into a hysterical scream again, her eyes glittering with anger and, perhaps, fear of sudden, inevitable independence. You created this debt, not me, I replied calmly, not raising my voice, but my every word was as sharp as a blade. And speaking of debt, I continued with icy calm, I've made the decision to no longer send the monthly $600 for utilities. And, Beatrice, no more financial injections for you. The shock on their faces might have seemed comical if the whole scene hadn't been so painfully sad, like a tragicomedy in which I suddenly refused to play the role of my eternal sponsor. You can't do this, Mom gasped, her voice filled with horror, as if I had suggested something unthinkable. I can. And I do. I went to the door, opened it, and holding it open, I said, I think it's time for you to leave. We're not going anywhere until you agree to pay us. Beatrice sat down on my couch with stubborn determination, as if this act was her last hope. Then your choice is simple, I took out my phone, holding it in plain sight. Either you leave voluntarily, or I will call the police and report the intruders in my house. Your decision. Silence reigned for several seconds, thick, sticky, soaked with indignation and despair, and finally they got up and left without a word or a glance. The door slammed shut with a soft but final click. I sat down, blocked their numbers, poured myself a glass of wine, and, for the first time in a long time, drank not to other people's worries and obligations, but to my liberation, from manipulation, from guilt, from other people's expectations. The next 2 months were unexpectedly quiet. No one came, wrote, or called, and if I heard anything from mutual acquaintances, it was only fragments of gossip. My parents and Beatrice, as it turned out, wasted no time spreading rumors, calling me an egotistical, ungrateful, terrible daughter and sister. And if at first it hurt my ears, leaving scratches on my heart, then gradually I realized that their words no longer have power over me. Their opinion was not the truth. Their reproaches are not judicial. I redirected the money that used to be spent on endless support into investments and finally opened a travel fund, the very dream that I had been putting off for years. I went to Portugal alone, for the first time in a long time, free not only from debt, but also from guilt. I wandered through the narrow streets of Lisbon, sat with coffee on the balcony in the port, felt alive. I started dating again, joined a travel club, and, most importantly, I volunteered at a financial literacy program for teenagers, because if there was one thing I knew well, it was how hard it was to learn to be independent when everyone around me was just taking it. One evening, returning home from one of these sessions, I accidentally bumped into Susan, an old friend of my mother's, at the grocery store. "Carlotta, how long ago?" she said, hugging me with unexpected warmth. "I heard that everything is fine with you and your family now. Difficult?" I nodded, expecting a lecture on the sanctity of family ties, but Susan surprised me. "Your mom tells everyone that you left them, but, I've known them for 30 years. And all this time they were waiting for someone to come and solve their problems for them." She squeezed my hand. Well done for setting boundaries. This short meeting was almost a revelation for me. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear it, confirmation from the outside, an independent view that saw the situation for what it really was. Not a selfish daughter, but a woman who was tired of being the only pillar of stability in a family accustomed to her generosity as due. A week later, I found an email in my inbox. Real, handwritten. From Beatrice. For a second, I thought about throwing it away without opening it. But, driven by curiosity, I opened the envelope. "Carlotta, it's all started. Christian and I are getting divorced. His mother convinced him that I wasn't good enough for their family." I sighed, the irony not escaping me. Beatrice continued, "I've been thinking about you. About how I treated you, how we all treated you. I'm not asking for money. But I'd like to talk. Someday." I folded the letter and put it in the drawer. Maybe one day we can rebuild our relationship. But only on new terms. Based on respect, not dependence. I had only heard about my parents in passing. Someone I knew mentioned that they had moved to a smaller house, to a more modest neighborhood, one that they could afford with their own money. A part of me felt a pang of guilt. But a much bigger part of her felt relieved. Finally, they began to take responsibility for their own decisions. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.